We are blessed to have some very special people with us. Every week we have some wonderful visitors and so forth, but I want to begin by saluting my dear brother Greg and the precious little Collins, who is the wife and daughter of our beloved Shantae. Give it up for the two, in special two there. So, yes, we are so blessed to have you, Colin. We love you, Sister Colin, Brother Greg. Yes, we do. And say hello to your grandmother, too, for us. She got her partner, too, her companion. Yes, indeed. And I'm blessed to have my daughter. I only got one daughter in the whole world, I'm telling you. And she is 16 years old. She's going on 26 in terms of paideia. Oh, yes, indeed. I've been pushing her. She came out of the womb getting Socratized. You know what I mean? But she's one of the great joys and blessings of my life. Her name is Zaytoon West. What's D-Lon? Zaytoon West. Give it up for my dear daughter. Boy, I embarrass her for the rest of her life. That's our daddy's love. Indeed. Now, I know I got patriarchal challenges. We understand that. Well, but the love still comes through. Absolutely. And any other visitors other than this special brother, I want to know, when I walked into the room today, I received a special gift. This is Dartmouth football. And I'm telling you, I've had many magnificent moments here at Dartmouth, but one of those has been to interact with the high-quality football players. And one of the common denominators of my conversations with them is a salute to their coach. And let me tell you something, the coach is the source of magnificent paideia, of character-shaping and virtue-inducing activities. And he was kind enough to grace us with his presence. Where's our dear? Yes, give it up for the coach. Coach Nevins. Oh, man. Oh, man. Oh, we salute you, brother. We salute you. Absolutely, that makes a difference. No Dartmouth without Dartmouth football. No Dartmouth football without the coach and the players. And then the challenges of those exemplary figures like Du Bois and others. And let us turn now to that powerful chapter. Oh, yes, that chapter 10 of the Faith of the Fathers. We've got 4 profound moments in this text. And if we don't get a chance to explore as much as we would like, we'll spill over into next week. But beginning with the faith of the fathers, black religion, but we begin, of course, with religion itself. Coming from the Latin religare. Religare means to bind and rebind, and to bind persons together given what they highly prize, what they highly revere. So religion in its etymological sense, going back to Rome, going back to the Latin, is the ways in which we featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creatures born between urine and feces bind with each other around the things we cherish, not just abstract principles or dogma or doctrine, but we're talking about affection. We're talking about profound attachment that is existential. It's good to have our dear sister, too, the daughter of our grand journalist there as well. Raise your hand there, sister. Give it up for this sister here. Give it up for this sister. I just noticed, I forgot it. Yes, indeed. I'm sorry to embarrass you, but I didn't want to forget you. Right in the midst of this ligare. And how will these particular peoples, this slice of humanity, these black people, bind together with affection, community, what the Germans would call Gemeinschaft, the face-to-face, soul-to-soul, eye-to-eye connection in which trust is generated, reliability is generated, deep forms of philia, of friendship, and of course family. That's what Du Bois is getting at. And he's saying, in fact, that in the face of the slavery and the Jim Crow and the Jane Crow and the new Jim Crow and the new Jane Crow and so forth, in the face of all the attacks and assaults, the injury and the insults, the force and the fraud, the lies and the crimes, how did these people equip themselves? How did they respond to that call for help that we've talked about before in the lectures of William James? The call for help is the core issue of religion. The acknowledgement of one's inadequacies, one's relative helplessness, and who will respond to that call. That's what we're talking about here. And he begins with a poem by Fiona MacLuhan. Dim face of beauty haunting all the world, fair face of beauty all too fair to see, where the lost stars adorn the heavens are hurled. There alone for thee may white peace be. Beauty, sad face of beauty. Mystery, wonder, what are these dreams to foolish babbling men who cry with little noises neath the thunder of ages ground to sand, to a little sand. It's very important that this ligare, binding around those things that we cherish, associated with the holy, but inseparable from beauty, inseparable from goodness, inseparable from justice. That these elements are shot through the various kinds of binding. Now, of course, what is it about religion? Religion, on the one hand, can be unbelievable, empowering, and enabling. Some of us who are religious, like myself, understand my religious tradition as one of the things that allows me to preserve whatever sanity I have. And that only comes and goes week by week. But there's other friends, my partners, my comrades, who look at religion and say, it doesn't just bind, but it's too narrow. It suffocates. You see, the doctrine's too petrified. It doesn't move quick enough. There's too much hypocrisy in the religious institutions. Too much patriarchy and homophobia. Christian tradition, too much anti-Jewish element shot through it, given the fact that the personal savior is a Jewish brother named Jesus. It comes out of prophetic Judaism. It's a complicated story, but a very important one. So you can imagine it swings back and forth. It could be enabling. It could be disenabling. It could be liberating. It can be oppressive. And of course, the reality is that not just every religious institution, but nearly every human institution is shot through with deep oppressive possibilities and some liberating possibilities too. That's the kind of creatures we are. But we want to be mindful of that. We don't want to romanticize religion or black religion, even given the crucial role that the black church has played in the history of black people. It's played a negative role too. You ask some of our gay and lesbian and bisexual and trans folk. It's played a negative role in terms of certain poor people who have tremendous difficulty entering the church, and churches that put an unbelievable premium on respectability. You have to dress a certain kind of way and walk a certain kind of way and have a certain kind of degree and so forth and so on. And you're not really welcome if you don't, which means, of course, that Jesus would have a difficult time getting in those churches. Just like Jesus would have an unbelievable time getting into most churches on Easter. Oh, you're so concerned about me arising. You didn't say too much about the crucifixion. You didn't say too much about that Holy Saturday when I was dead, when God was dead. You just want to identify with a winner. This ain't no Super Bowl sensibility. Win, win, win at any cost. Win, win, win. No, this is religion. This is about life, not a game. This is about death, not just being a contemporary loser who will win the next season. Oh, something else is at stake. That's what we like about our dear brother coach. He knows that his team not just playing a game, he's shaping them for life. Isn't that right, my brother? Shaping them for life. And I'm not just speaking abstractly. I get it directly from his players. Let me get back to my text. Very important to keep in mind that Fiona McLuhan was really a pseudonym, was the name used. It was really actually a brother named William Sharp, who went through fundamental transformation and wrote most of his poems and novels under a woman's name. Fascinating. You could write not a dissertation, at least a MA thesis on William Sharp, his interaction with the Rossetti Circle, his relation to Keats, coming from Scotland and wanting to write most of what he did under a woman's name after he falls deeply in love with a sister named Edith, who never reciprocates the love, almost like Beatrice for Dante. Never reciprocates it. Yearning, longing, never returned. Deeply melancholic. Very important. Black religion, like black life, like black culture, shot through with the melancholic. We associate religion with transcending the world. We associate religion with unbelievable joy. No, there is no conception of mature religion that's not wrestling with despair, that's not wrestling with dread, that's not wrestling with unbelievable pain and suffering. You want a little water, my sister? I got water that I never use. It's for the sister president right here. All right. But then the spiritual. Steal away home. Steal away home. One of those many, many Negro spirituals that has many different meanings. Home. Where does one find a home? Where will black people in the United States find a home? Very little access to land or territory. Very little positive treatment up until the last 30 years or so by the U.S. government. Where will you find a home? You can't sustain the family under 244 years of white supremacist slavery. You can't sustain the family after 80 years of white supremacist slavery under the U.S. Constitution. Where will you find a home? Maybe the only place you'll find home is in language. Maybe the only place you find home is in your music. Maybe the only place you'll find home is in the way you walk, in the way you talk, the way you stylize space and time in such a way that you leave your mark on the world, because you are an exilic people. You are in perennial exile. That was one of the things that came through down in Virginia this weekend. I was blessed to spend some good time there and speak at St. Paul's Memorial right across from the University of Virginia with the right-wing brothers and sisters with their torches, wouldn't let us out for an hour or so. Then the next morning we had sunrise in the black side of town, on the chocolate side of town, the First Baptist Church. And we said, look, how will we find what home signifies, which is self-worth and self-respect that's presupposed. You don't have to try to prove it to mama or daddy. They accept you unconditionally. Well, you'll find it maybe only in the language and the song and the movement and the love that you must not just create but exemplify, even as that love might be radically called into question, if not even attacked. And what does it mean for a people to be so radically exilic, never ever finding a home, even in the searches for home? Garvey trying to find home in Africa. We saw Chief Sam trying to find it in Oklahoma, and so forth. Well, Du Bois says, oh, in religion. And the religion is inseparable from the music. Inseparable from not just music as sound, but music as dealing with the interplay of harmony and dissonance, of trying to transform noise into some beautiful expression. You see. And so it's no accident. Du Bois begins with what? And keep in mind now, this is the Du Bois of Great Barrington. He's going all the way out, as we saw earlier in this text, to rural black America. And he says, I saw something that I never beheld in all of my life. Let me see, I'm going to jump right in here. To be sure, we in Berkshire were not perhaps as stiff and formal as those in Suffolk of olden times, yet we were very quiet and subdued. And I know not what would have happened those clear Sabbath mornings where someone punctuated the sermon with a wild scream or interrupted the long prayer with a loud amen. And so here comes the New England Negro into gut bucket, Jim Crow, rich Tennessee. Oh, that's culture shock right there. And what does he encounter? And so most striking to me as I approached the village in a little plain church perched aloof was the air of intense excitement that possessed that mass of black folk. A sort of suppressed terror hung in the air and seemed to seize us, a Pythian madness, a demoniac possession that lent terrible reality to song and word. The black and massive form of the preacher swayed and quivered as the words crowded to his lips and flew at us in singular eloquence. The people moaned and fluttered. And then the gaunt-cheeked black sister, a woman, beside me suddenly leaped straight in the air and shrieked like a lost soul. Around about came wail and groan and outcry, a scene of human passion such as I had never conceived before. Yes, this is the combative spirituality of an exilic people. Spiritual warfare. Are you equipped? Are you ready? It's tied to a physicality because it includes the body. That's why religion is never fundamentally about just opinions and beliefs. It's about ritual. And what does ritual do? Ritual transforms the world of chronos, of everyday life, into something elevated, something that has unbelievable meaningfulness that will equip you as you move back into everyday life, move back into chronos. And of course, all cultures, all peoples have rituals of some sort. You see. How many of y'all plan to get married one day? Oh, I see the institution of marriage is not in good shape, is it? Good God Almighty. Lord, Lord, Lord. Well, if you do get married, it's not going to be an ordinary day. And if it is an ordinary day, you need to reconsider what you're doing. Because it's going to lift you out of everyday life. It's going to lift you out of chronos. And it's going to be a moment of meaningfulness and unbelievable significance. Not just for the two, whoever the two are, but for the loved ones around. Religious ritual, marriage. We all are on our way to not just our own funeral, but the funeral of loved ones. When you plant your mother in that grave, or your grandfather in that grave, so it is. A shift and a shattering of everyday life. And a ritualistic moment that you'll never forget for the rest of your life. How does one sustain one's sense of self and community when so much is coming at one? In this case, in these black folk, we've seen all the multi-layered levels of oppression and exploitation and degradation and so forth. And you got to keep in mind now, this black religion was against the law under U.S. system. Could not worship by themselves, only under white supervision. How come? Nat Turner, black preacher, organizing in the church for slave insurrections. How come? The first major insurrection, Gabriel Brozer, organized at the funeral of a slave baby. What happens at funerals? Like any other moment of ritual. You really find out who you are. You gotta stop everything and examine your relation to the dead. You as quick. And at that funeral, the slave baby, Gabriel Brozer, got up in the black church context and said, It's time to organize. We're going to overthrow slavery. And the response was not just to keep black religious gatherings under white supervision, but in certain parts of the country, and this is the ultimate act of dehumanization. We saw this among our precious Jewish brothers and sisters under the Nazis, where you do not have the right to bury your own beloved dead. What is it like to be an exilic people in which you do not even have the right to have a dignified goodbye to them? And we talked about humando, meaning burial. That's where the word humanity comes from, where human comes from. Not to be able to say goodbye to your loved one. That generates a level of psychic disorientation and existential deracination. By deracination, I mean rootlessness, feeling as if you can't find your footing in life at all. If your mother is dead and you'll never get a chance to say goodbye. Ask some of the sailors when their best friends are lost in the Atlantic Ocean and that body's never recovered. And we saw the same thing with our fellow citizens in 9/11. So many of them could never say goodbye. And for black folk, more and more, that became a way of life. How you gonna deal with that level of dissonance, that level of being completely off what you would like to be the harmony in one's life? And he goes on to say 3 things characterize this religion of the slave: the preacher, the music, and the frenzy. We'll say a bit more about the preacher because it relates to black leadership. For so long, so many of the black spokespersons and leaders came out of that black church because that was the context in which one could establish some kind of bonds of trust, and one could speak a language that related not just to their intellect and their minds, but also their hearts and their souls, that can move them to try to be better, move them to try to be more courageous. It's no accident when we get to the short story of the coming of John, what happens? John comes back. They expected him to be a leader. John's been to college. He's undergone a certain kind of paideia. And when he gets back, he looks down on the folk. You benighted ones. You need my enlightenment. I don't know why you still persist in the ways of your beliefs and practices. You need to be uplifted. You need to be civilized. You need to be brought into the modern world and modernized. That arrogance and condescension and haughtiness that too often goes hand to hand with educated folk looking at uneducated folk. John's hits a stone wall in Du Bois's piece of fiction here. These preachers, there's no way that they could sustain their role and function if they had that level of arrogance and condescension. Now, we live in a different moment today, and we're going to talk about this later on when we engage in our critical dialogue, because much of black leadership today does not come out of the black church. It comes out of what? The black professional managerial class. I went to Dartmouth. I deserve to be a leader. Please. Please. I hope you got Socratized. What makes you think you're a leader just because you educated? Yes, we want our leaders to have insight, wisdom, discernment. But where's your connection with the very folk that you are struggling with? Where's your connection with the community? What evidence do they have that you have earned leadership as opposed to impose yourself on them because of your stamp of education? Dartmouth, Harvard, Princeton. I've been with my beloved daughter. We all around the country because she's applying for colleges. And it's a fascinating experience. We went on the tour this morning, didn't we? That was a fascinating tour, Dartmouth, though. Boy, I'm telling you, they had some stories to tell. And you all unpack stories any way you like. But we had a good time, and they did a good job in so many ways. The music. The music. What does he say about the music, he says? The music of religion is that plaintive rhythmic melody with its touching minor cadences, which despite caricature and defilement still remains the most original and beautiful expression of human life and longing yet born on American soil. We're going to get much more of this next week when he talks about the sorrow songs, but we know what he's talking about. Going all the way back, spirituals, blues, Ma Rainey, Robert Johnson, on through jazz with Duke and Mary Lou Johnson, all the way up to Prince and Kendrick. Sprung from the African forests, where its counterpart can still be heard, it was adapted, changed, and intensified by the tragic soul life of the slave. And of course, that slave is wrestling with not just social death, not just being dishonored and devalued, but being socially dead because there's no place for you to go. You're perennially locked in. That was one of the dialogues, again, we had in Virginia. He said the Confederacy in its Constitution says what? We want black people enslaved in perpetuity. As long as you are around as a people, you will be enslaved on this land. That's in the U.S. Confederate Constitution, Jefferson Davis and others. That's what we're talking about. But we need that for our freedom. Oh, okay, so you got a freedom, a conception of freedom locked into a dialectic of enslaving these people permanently. That's soul murder and social death simultaneously. And yet, resistance, reverence, ritual, religion still persist. See, you can attempt to impose social death on a people and a soul murder on a people, but it doesn't mean that they are thoroughly defeated unless they choose to be. You can consent to your own death and murder. But if you choose not and you still have a body and other folk, you can resist. And black religion was one of the primary means, but even black music more so. More so. In fact, I would argue in many ways that when you talk about so-called race in America, the best place to begin is in the music. And then from there, you move to the other arts. And sports is a part of the arts. Now, we may reduce it to entertainment because of the commodification of quest for athletic excellence. But you have to be an artist if you're going to be a great athlete. And an artist is about what? It's about that kenosis that we talked about. You got to empty yourself. You got to give it all. You got to learn how to connect with others. You got to learn not just to win, but to learn how to internally have victories even when you externally lose. It's a spiritual affair. It's a moral affair, as well as winning a championship. And of course, I hope Dartmouth does well in the coming season. I hear good words. My brother told me you got a good team. Is that right, though, brother? Yes, sir. Yeah, and that's just not empty optimism, is it? No, that's what I'm talking about. All right. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Under the stress of law and whip, it became the one true expression of a people's sorrow, despair, and hope. And then the frenzy, the shouting. And the shouting is inseparable from joy. And what else does Du Bois say? He says it's not just the last essential Negro religion, it's the one more devotedly believed in than all the rest. Boy, that's heavy. What is it about the shout? You see, it's not just about some empty emotionalism that you might see in a Pentecostal church. It is the full self-investment in a joy that allows you to continue to endure in the face of social death, soul murder, a whole host of things. All the different forces coming at black folk. And what does Du Bois go on to say? He says, the Negro Church today is the social center of Negro life and the most characteristic expression of African character. Now, this is the next paragraph that begins the Negro Church. What page is that there? 495. 495. What Du Bois is saying is, Hegel has a notion of Sittlichkeit. Sittlichkeit is the inner ethical life of a people, the inner ethical life of a people. Look, for example, on the paragraph that begins, the second fact noted, namely that the Negro Church antedates the Negro home. You all see that there? The Negro Church antedates the Negro home. Why does it antedate the Negro home? Because the Negro home and the family was shattered under slavery. Kids were sold in different parts of the country. So the only thing that could sustain a people in terms of ligare, binding them together, was his church. You all see the page?
Yeah.
499. What does he say? It leads to an explanation of much that is paradoxical in this communistic institution. I'm not talking about Karl Marx or Lenin or Mao, but what is communism fundamentally about? Going back to the New Testament, the Koine Greek, written by the first century figures. It's about needs being satisfied. It's about a commonality. It's about a sharing. It's about a coming together so that the most vulnerable are not marginalized and crushed, but everybody has a stake in everybody's potential, even though all of us have different potential and have different capacities. This is a communistic institution, and in the morals of its members, it leads us to regard this institution, this church, as, there's our word from the very beginning, peculiarly the expression of the Sittlichkeit, the inner ethical life of a people, in a sense seldom true elsewhere. We're not just talking about the physical development of the church, but the more important inner ethical life of the people who compose it. This is one of the most crucial points, not just in the history of black people. This is one of the most crucial points in the history of this nation. How could it be that a people who have been hated for so long, enslaved, Jim Crow, lynched, spit on, hated for so long, unleash into the world so much love and teach the world so much about how to love? You see, this is a very crucial question. Martin Luther King Jr. doesn't come out of a vacuum. John Coltrane's Love Supreme doesn't come out of a vacuum. Toni Morrison's Beloved doesn't come out of a vacuum. James Baldwin's love-soaked essays don't come out of a vacuum. My mother and father dealing with unbelievable Jim Crow, teaching me, little Ronnie, don't you ever stoop so low that you hate somebody. You always love your way through the darkness, because that's the kind of people you come from, and that's how we raised you. You part of this caravan of love that we heard 2 weeks ago with the Isley Brothers. Thank you, Sister President, for playing that. You see. Now, we're not saying all black people come out loving folk, but we're saying, lo and behold, when you look at the tradition, you see, of Frederick Douglass, we have been enslaved. We don't want to enslave anybody. Ida B. Wells Barnett, we have been terrorized. We don't want to terrorize anybody. We're not going to be counter-terrorists. We're going to call terrorism into question. We don't want to be the next slaveholders. We want to call slavery into question. We don't want to just fit into the United States and be part of some class hierarchy. What do you say, Du Bois? We want America open to everybody, including the indigenous peoples whose very lands and bodies was a precondition of it. That's the best of the tradition that he's talking about here. That's inner ethical. It's hard to find that these days in the black church, of course, because commodification is taking over like every other institution in America. And I should even add in Virginia. Should we try to get some of those black preachers out of the church? They so scared. You say, what you scared of? I thought you were a Christian. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to be free. Where's your radical freedom in love? Where's your radical love in freedom? I thought the cross liberated you to be in the world but not of it. Well, Brother West, yeah, that's what we talk about, but we don't want to get shot. Oh, I see. You spiritually intimidated. You can't have parrhesia if you're intimidated. You can't be afraid. That's one of the ways in which people remain subordinate. Keep them afraid, shaking in their boots all the time so they'll allow for some access to carrots and think that's the best that they can do. When they going to take a spiritual stand? When they going to take a moral stand? That's what Du Bois is saying the black church has been one of the sources of. One of the crucial sources of. And this is a challenge to all of us, of course. But you can imagine that in the history of black people, without this inner ethical life, you see, if the masses of black people had gone with Gabriel Broser and Nat Turner, so you had terrorist attacks back and forth. The Klan on one side, the black version of the Klan on the other. What if you had that every generation? You wouldn't have America. You wouldn't have a democracy. You'd have racial strife, violent racial war over and over again. Oh, Brother West, we've had riots, we've had rebellions. Absolutely, that's true. There's no doubt about that. But there's no long tradition of black versions of the KKK. You kill our children, we're going to kill your children. You lynch our uncle, we're going to go lynch John McGillicuddy next week. No. Why? Because it's wrong, it's immoral, it's unjust. It just adds to the cycle of hatred and violence. And if you have inner ethical life, if you have spiritual quality to who you are as a person and a community, then you would rather be momentarily defeated with your integrity than win and be a gangster like those who are gangsterizing you. That's the inner ethical life of the best of this black church. And it's still at work, though it's weaker and weaker every year. That's part of the challenge. That's part of the challenge indeed. See, the black bards, he said, used to sing, "Oh, freedom, freedom over me. Before I be a slave, I be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free." That's exactly the words that we use in Virginia, both to the black preachers as well as to the larger community. Do you really believe that you'd rather be buried in your grave or free? Well, no, I think I got a little more time, Brother West. I like the song, but you're pushing the point. And I said, I understand, I don't want to die either, but you know what? I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for the afterlife of those who died for me. I don't want to be no martyr. I don't want to die. I got my precious daughter here. I got a son too. I know she always wants to go. I won't go say nothing about that though, girl, but I got a son too. I got loved ones too. You see. But the black church has generally produced those freedom fighters. Fannie Lou Hamer is probably one of the greatest of the 20th century in that way. She goes on television, says what? I question America. I question America's commitment to justice. I question America in the face of her hypocrisy. Lyndon Baines Johnson is watching in the White House and says, we got to get that so-and-so woman off the television. We got to get a press conference. The president kept a press conference right away. And Fannie Lou Hamer is fighting Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlantic City at that time. Because Martin Luther King Jr. accepts the compromise of the Democratic Party. She says, no. We want to seat all of the members of the Mississippi Freedom Party. Martin Luther King Jr. says, no, compromise. You're wrong, Martin. I love you to death, but you're wrong, Martin. You went on television and talked about questioning America. You sound like Malcolm X. She say, no, he sound like me. He sound like me. And Fannie Lou says, I'm speaking in the name of Jesus. He's speaking in the name of Allah. We comrades, but I got more love for the white brothers and sisters than he does. He's got some growing to do. But we got the same love for black folk. That's the point. Got the same love for black people. You see. But Malcolm just had a whole lot of spiritual growth to have love for white brothers and sisters. And he was moving in that direction, as we know. That's what Du Bois is trying to get at here. And it's no accident that it's in this chapter that we get the fully articulation of the double consciousness. We saw that in the first chapter. He had to wait until chapter 10 to lay it out. And I'm going to read it just briefly here, you see. From the double life every American Negro must live. It's in the chapter that begins, it's difficult to explain clearly the present critical stage of Negro religion. Just go a little bit further down. It's difficult to explain clearly the present critical stage of Negro religion. You all see that there? Oh, yeah. What page was that? 502. Thank you so much. Now look at the very end of that paragraph. From the double life every American Negro must live, as a Negro and an American is swept on by the current of the 19th while struggling in the eddies of the 15th. From this must arise a painful self-consciousness, an almost morbid sense of personality, and a moral hesitancy which is fatal to self-confidence. The worlds within, without the veil, are changing and changing rapidly, but not at the same rate, not in the same way. They must produce a peculiar wrenching of the soul. There's that peculiar again. A peculiar sense of doubt and bewilderment. Such a double life. Double thoughts, double duties, double social classes must give rise to double words and double ideals, and it will tempt the mind to pretense, it's very important, pretense, posing, posturing, wearing the mask, acting like you're one thing when you're something else, when you're really just scared and insecure, or it could lead toward, he says, revolt. And Du Bois, 1903, always highly suspicious of the legacies of Gabriel Broser and Nat Turner and revolt that he associates with revenge. And we know revenge is not the same thing as justice. We don't need to read Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice to know the difference between revenge and justice. And he's against revenge. He associates revolt with revenge. There's no love in it. There's no compassion in it. There's no spiritual quality in it. There's no moral content to it. It's just counterterrorism. It's terrorism coming at you. You just terrorize back. But he says, it generates hypocrisy too. And at this point, he's associating a certain kind of black radicalism with that pretense and revolt. He will change his mind by 1940. It's interesting, you see. But such doubtful words and phrases can one perhaps make most clearly picture the peculiar ethical paradox that faces the Negro. Feeling that his rights and his dearest ideals are being trampled upon, that the public conscience is ever more deaf to his righteous appeal. You see, his righteous appeal. You see, for Du Bois, this veil that we've been talking about and the power within this veil, of which the black church, but also black family, and especially black music, especially black artists. And by artists, I mean Romare Bearden as painter as much as Muhammad Ali, athlete. By artists, I mean Duke Ellington as much as I mean a Toni Morrison. And most importantly, by artists, I mean those invisible, overlooked, underappreciated black people who make their lives a work of art, whether they end up producing artifacts or not. Because at the center of the caravan of love, at the center of the tradition of love warriors is an artistic life lived, not just a song sung, but this veil, valley of the shadow of death. And that's why his eulogy for his mentor, who he never knew that well, but always looked as an academic model, you see, Alexander Crummell. Alexander Crummell, chapter 12. This is a history of a human heart, the tale of a black boy who long years ago began to struggle with life that he might know the world and know himself. The temptation of hate that stood out against the red dawn, the temptation of despair that darkened noonday, and the temptation of doubt that ever steals along with twilight. Above all, you'll hear the vows he crossed, the valley of humiliation and the valley of the shadow of death. Now, of course, the eulogy for his son a certain kind of physical death. You see, the young boy, the young Bucart, never lives beyond 3. And the description that Du Bois has, again, very much like his daughter, investing so much in the son. Unto this day a child is born. The prophetic overtones coming out of the biblical text. You say, Du Bois, isn't that excessive expectation of your child? Could you allow him just to learn how to walk first? Could you allow him just to learn how to talk first before he becomes your next great prophet like yourself? Now, of course, we talked about this before in terms of imposing that on one's children and so forth. The last thing I ever want to do with beloved Zaytun is say, I can't wait until you are the next professor teaching in the summer of Dartmouth of 2059. That's the last thing I want to do. I said, girl, you're going to be yourself. You be free. Find the love, the courage, the compassion in your own way, on your own terms, expressing your own voice. Yes, you could say Cornel West was your daddy. That's fine, because we love each other, but that's it. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. But that's it. After that, you're free. Marry who you want to. But ask me for consultation. Not my permission, but consultation. Pursue what you want to in dialogue with old school daddy. But Du Bois already, his son is what, oh my God, he was going to be the next. The prophetic dream has been shattered. The prophetic possibility has been called into question. One of the great freedom fighters has lost his life. Du Bois, he's just a year and a few months. How you know? He could have been a gangster. Good people produce gangsters. I told my parents that, because I've been a gangster for a long time in a certain way. I just try to be Christian in my high moments. You see, Mom, Dad, I'm doing the best I can. We did everything for you, and you still acting a fool. Yeah, that's true. Because I'm choosing to. I have a freedom, and I'm trying to stay on the right way. You see. But they're not responsible one way or the other, but their influence is inside of me. That's all they can do. That's all they can do. But with Crummell, you see, the temptation, the hate, pushes it back. It's a temptation of despair. It's always there, but he surmounts it. He almost just rides it like he's riding a hurricane. But that temptation to doubt is the most difficult one. Self-doubt, the doubt of one's people, the doubt of other people to ever be able to accent the best of what they can be. And of course, in some ways, we're in a very similar moment like that now. The level of cynicism is unbelievable, he says. But what is... But Du Bois says what? This is the paragraph that begins, but Alexander Crummell it gave back. You all see that paragraph? But Alexander Crummell it gave back. The valley of the shadow of death gives few of its pilgrims back to the world, but Alexander Crummell it gave back. Somebody holler out the page. 519. Out of the temptation of hate and burned by the fire of despair, triumphant over doubt and steeled by sacrifice against humiliation, he turned at last home across the waters, humble and strong, gentle and determined. And we won't go into the details, the denial, discrimination, finally getting a chance to gain his degree, then goes to Cambridge University. We're talking about the real Cambridge, not Harvard. This is Cambridge, England. This is Cambridge, England. The Cambridge where Harvard resided was named after. Right. That's where Crummell goes to school. Cambridge University, England. And he ends up in Africa. He ends up in Liberia. He fought among his own, the low, the grasping, and the wicked, with that unbinding righteousness which is the sword of the just. This is the great exemplar of paideia for Du Bois, Alexander Crummell. He never faltered. He seldom complained. He simply worked, inspiring the young, rebuking the old, helping the weak, guiding the strong. So he grew and brought within his wide influence all that was best of those who walk within the veil. Those who live within knew not nor dreamed of that full power within that mighty inspiration. And we've already seen in this text when Du Bois gets to the black side of the veil, the last thing he wants to convey is these black people are simply victims. They've been victimized, but they're not just victims. They're agents in the world. They're peoples with bodies, intelligence, imagination, and so forth. And there's unbelievable power, even though not a lot of economic and political power. Unbelievable spiritual power, unbelievable moral power, unbelievable cultural power. That's, in fact, what Du Bois is getting at. He says, the more I met Alexander Crummell, the more I felt how much that world was losing, which knew so little of him. In another age, he might have sat among the elders of the land in purple-bordered toga. In another country, mothers might have sung him to the cradles. He did his work. He did it nobly and well, and yet I sorrow that here he worked alone with so little human sympathy. His name today in this broad land means little, and comes the 50 million years laden with no incense of memory or emulation, and herein lies the tragedy of the age. Not that we are poor only, not for all persons know something of some kind of poverty, not that persons are wicked. Who is good? What is truth? But that men, human beings, know so little of the others, and not just little, but we lose sight of the great exemplars of integrity and love and courage. And one of the saddest moments in Du Bois's whole life is when he writes his autobiography and finishes it right before he dies. And he says, I've labored for 94 years, and I see that the children of America, and especially the colored children of America, do not know my name. It's 1963. And they didn't know his name. Du Bois doesn't come back until the late 60s. He's already dead. He doesn't begin to have any prominence until the 70s and 80s. Thank God, 2017, we here at Dartmouth, we give Du Bois center stage, not because he has monopoly on truth, but because he has certain truths with which we must come to terms. But when he died, the exact words he writes about Crummell could be written about him. And it's not just an individual matter of two black men. How many of us know Ann Braden, one of the great freedom fighters of the 1940s and 50s and 60s, a white sister from Kentucky who grew up in a white supremacist family and joined Martin Luther King Jr., became one of the greatest freedom fighters. How many will remember Sister Heather this weekend? 32 years old, goes against the grain in her community, sides with the black people there in Charlottesville and gives her life. How many still know Rabbi Hester? How many really know Miles Horton, who founded Highlander Center? And it was there that Rosa Parks and Martin King and the others would go 3 months before she went back to Montgomery and sat down on a bus in order to stand up for justice. How many know his wife, white sister, co-wrote We Shall Overcome, which was the anthem of the black freedom movement? How come we don't know these names? We know so little of the great examples. Oh, I wish the press had been there this week and been in those churches and seen people from all walks of life, all colors, Jewish and Christian and Buddhist and Muslim, all together in those churches, marching, some of them in their robes, some of them were clergy. I'm not clergy, I'm just lay brother. You didn't see that on television. They're not interested. They're making money. They want the sensationalism. They want to see the conflict. They want to see folk duking it out. Yes, they ought to cover that. But what about some of the exemplary folk who are not that well known, who may not generate revenue on that the camera highlights, you see? That's in part what Du Bois is talking about. And he says, 1903. Will they learn something 114 years later? What a challenge. What a grand challenge. And there's so many other examples. Grace Lee Boggs, and one can go on and on and on. James Jabrowski, these are Arnold Johnson. These people ought to be household names. They gave everything to keep America free and democratic, but they easily overlooked. How many of us even keep track of the soldiers who come back from the wars? They can't even put the bodies on television. You see, one of the saddest moments I had in Chicago just a few months ago was to watch a family, it was an Italian family, waiting for that body to come out of the plane. Invisible, you see, underappreciated, just on the side, and who's mainstream. The market-driven celebrities, usually of very little spiritual quality or moral content. That's the ones we keep track of. And I'm not coming on down with just Kim Kardashian, but we can start there. Just famous for being not worthy of being famous. Love you, Kim. Love you, Kanye. Pray for both of you, but you know what? If all that attention to that celebrity status was somehow ricocheted to ordinary Americans doing unbelievable moral witness and spiritual engagement, we might have very different perceptions about what the possibilities are in this nation and around the world. And that's one of the reasons why when we come to the short story, we get the embodiment of the spirit of revenge. And Du Bois cast it in the short story, but it is in part autobiographical, because Du Bois, critical of the spirit of revenge and revolt, still has elements of it inside of him. He's fighting, trying to hold off from a revenge, trying to hold off from a revolt, from revolutionary counter-violence. In the Coming of John, with Du Bois' favorite classical composer, not Beethoven, but Wagner. I think Du Bois is dead wrong, but that's just another moment. Well, I have deep disagreements with my brother. Wagner doesn't come close to Ludwig, but that's just an editorial moment. But for him, Wagner was the greatest. And it's in that opera house where the two Johns come together. And the white John goes to what school? Which one is it? Princeton. Why is it Princeton? Because Princeton was the only acceptable Ivy League school for Southern gentlemen. Princeton's the only Ivy League school that had a majority of its students fight on the Confederate side rather than the Union side. Princeton is the only Ivy League school that a Woodrow Wilson, who was president of Princeton from Virginia, that a Woodrow Wilson, who was governor of New Jersey, could go back to Washington, D.C. as president and resegregate Washington, D.C., bring in Griffin in The Birth of the Nation, show it and say this is history by thunder's lightning. That northernmost post of Confederacy called Princeton University. That's why the white John from the South goes to Princeton. It didn't say he went to Dartmouth. It's not to say Dartmouth was free of vicious white supremacy, but Princeton beat you at it. If there's a race, Princeton's hitting the tape. Dartmouth. And Harvard, Yale, Princeton. All of them got racism now, we know that. But Princeton's hitting the tape with a smile. Hit the white supremacist tape. Proud of it. I'm just being facetious. Y'all know you got to have some laughter in this stuff. You can break down. We had to laugh this weekend at certain moments because, what really you're laughing on is not cry, not have too many tears. But that's why that white brother went to Princeton. And he returned right back to be an elite in that white supremacist community with his father already an elite, you see. And that black John, alienated, isolated, stay focused on the sub-motif, the sub-theme of loneliness, of being alone for those who are serious about paideia. You see, that paideia is never a mass movement. Never, ever. Love of everybody, beginning with trans, bisexual, gay, lesbian, Jews, Arab, Palestinian, women, black folk, indigenous peoples, Latinos, and so forth. Fall in love with those folk and act thereon. Never a mass movement. You're always over against a thick grain. So it is in these 4 chapters. So it is with Du Bois. Du Bois is profoundly lonely. And one of the points of trying to connect Alexander Crummell all by himself, the only instance of a black person being above the veil forever being dead. Being dead. Isn't that exactly how he ends? Look at the last chapter of Passing a Firstborn. If one must have gone, why not I? Why might I not rest me from this restlessness and sleep from this wide awakening? Time in his young hands, and is not my time waning? Are there so many workers in the vineyard that the fair promise of this little body could lightly be tossed away? The wretched of my earth that lined the alleys of the nation sit fatherless and unmothered, but love sat above his cradle, and in his ear wisdom waited to speak. Perhaps, which is a favorite word of the great Samuel Beckett, perhaps, no certainty, no assurance, perhaps now he knows the all-love and needs not to be wise. Sleep then, child, sleep till I sleep, and waken to a baby voice and the ceaseless patter of little feet above the veil. He's above now the valley of the shadow of death. Death itself as a form of freedom, as a form of liberation, you see. But for those within the veil who really fall in love with the quest for truth and goodness and beauty, find themselves very lonely. That wonderful exchange between Jenny, the sister of John. Is it true that when you undergo paideia, you end up unhappy, you end up unsettled, you end up lonely? Yes, it is. Then I want to be unhappy. Ooh, that's serious business, isn't it? It's going to be difficult to promote forms of paideia that can generate such a radical unsettling that you find your formal conceptions of happiness called into question. Joy, yes. Happiness, ooh, that's going to be a tough one. That's going to be a tough one indeed. Where is that exchange? She said, I'm going to read it. John, she said, does it make everyone unhappy when they study and learn lots of things? This is right in the middle of the coming of John. I'm afraid it does, he said. And John, are you glad that you underwent paideia? That's just my Westian emendation there. Yes, came the answer. She watched the flickering lights upon the sea and said thoughtfully, I wish I was unhappy, and putting both arms around his neck, I think I am a little, John. Echoes of Josie. We saw that with Josie. Same thing. And in the end, one could argue it's a greater and a deeper form of happiness. But even if you don't go that far, there's still the joy in the process, you see. And for Du Bois, writing when he was writing in this text, and then looking at the propaganda of history that I had you read in 1935, and seeing the lack of progress, seeing even regress. Because Du Bois was writing in 1903, the emergence of the Klan, the emergence of xenophobic right-wing forces in the 1920s as a result of the end of the war. You see, the expansion of deeply xenophobic sensibilities and groups. And here's Du Bois holding on for dear life, and in the black context, finding himself much more lonely than he thinks he deserved. And by his death, he's all alone. By his death, he's all alone. We've talked about that before. You see. By the time Du Bois dies, NAACP won't touch him. Most black churches won't allow him access to the pulpits. Many of his Alpha brothers hold him at arm's length, but not all. Not all. There were a few. You see, there were a few. You see, claim him in death, scared of him in life. You see, so Du Bois is already prefiguring what is required if one has a serious and substantive commitment to paideia. You see, and that's why the times in which we live is not ever going to be a matter of just name calling and finger pointing, but it's going to be what kind of person are you and what are you willing to do? What are you willing to live for? What are you willing to sacrifice for? Who are you willing to serve? Or what are you willing to die for? That's the existential question of paideia. It's not the cheap kind of trashing of the others. Because I tell you, when I was standing there, 9 units would walk by, and we singing, "This little light of mine about to get crushed like cockroaches." I said, "Ooh, Lord, if it wasn't for the anarchists to come in, we would have." You see, we said, where is the space left for prophetic witness committed to love and justice of everybody? You see, how do you somehow try to bear witness in a context when folk are coming at you in one way, and then, of course, the fighting that's taking place just a few steps away? And I myself, I'd never seen that kind of hatred in its raw form up close. And I've been alive for a long, long time. So something was going on in Virginia in relation to the Du Bois and the narratives that we've been reading. But keep in mind, for Du Bois, there's no surprise at all. No surprise at all. The best of us, the worst of us, ebbs and it flows. Up and down. The best of America ebbs and it flows. It's up and it's down. The worst of America is always there. It ebbs, becomes more public, and it flows. You see. So it's not a matter of somehow thinking that, lo and behold, we're in a whole new world now. I can't believe this. America got people who hate in it. Oh, Lord. I'm going to have a heart attack. That's just too much. Everybody I grew up with in my little comfortable neighborhood smiled at each other. Time to shatter your silo. And it's not just a matter of the text. Some of those folks who were smiling, because one of the things about the folks who were marching was you get used to, some of the, what I'd call sick white brothers, marching in sheets and so forth. And we had that with the torch when we couldn't get out of the church. But to see so many of the white brothers who look just like the brothers I see when I'm walking through the airport. And I said, wow. So when I got to the airport in Charlottesville, I started looking around like, dang, I wonder, get on the plane. Yeah, how you doing? You Neo? Are you a Neo? How you doing? Man, it's good to see you. I'm glad we ain't got nothing mediating now. Because you couldn't believe it. And so many of them were young. I would say 60% of them were under 30 years old. I said, wait a minute. Under 30 years old, most of them voted for Bernie Sanders. Yes, Brother West, that's the ones you hang around. But no, we got some white brothers under 30 who reading something else. And they were very strong. They had determination in their eyes. And then they had some words for me, too. I won't share it, but Lord have mercy. In fact, one Nazi brother was very interesting. He said, F you, Brother West. Oh, I mean Nigger West. I'm sorry. And the only reason why he said Brother West, because I'm on TV a lot, and people say Brother West, Brother West, Brother West. So he used to hear it. He thinks it's one word. He thinks it's one word. Brother West, Brother West, Brother West. That's 2 words, brother. That's 2 words, man. So he just kind of got locked in. Brother, well, F you. Then he got to catch himself. Oh, no, I'm in Nigger West. And that's just the peak of it. I'm not going to go into all the details of this thing now, you see. And we standing right like this. I said, boy, if I lose my Holy Ghost. Oh, all that rage come out of me. And I'm a Christian but not a pacifist. Ooh. But no, I'm standing tall for love and justice. Not because I'm perfect. Because at that moment, that's what I choose to do. It might be another moment where I come out swinging and I'm wrong. And I told you so before I did it. But I couldn't help myself. If he'd have talked about my mama, and called her worthy of rape and so, it would have been hard to hold back. It's true. I'm that kind of brother. It's true. But what Du Bois is saying is, put this in a larger historical context in which the issues of morality and spirituality tied to domination and exploitation are understood so you can locate yourself in traditions of moral excellence, and spiritual excellence, and political wisdom, and commitment to common good. That's what Du Bois has been wrestling with throughout this class. And it's really something that we would be teaching this class at this particular historical moment where the Charlottesvilles, and of course we're going to have many, many more, I'm sure. This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. They're off now to Texas A&M. They're going to come back to Charlottesville. They may come to Hanover. You don't know. You don't know. And even the governor of Georgia, when the governor of Georgia gets up and says, I want the white supremacists to go home.
They are home.
And I said, Brother Governor, do you think that you don't have white supremacists in Virginia? You think they don't have them in Charlottesville? I'm sure you could do an empirical investigation in Hanover and find some folks stealing away saying, these folks think I'm liberal, but shit. I hear what those right-wingers saying. I just can't do it publicly because Hanover has a certain kind of temperament and tone. But on the down low, 2 o'clock in the morning, check my internet site. See what I'm looking at. All I'm saying is that every American town, city, across the board has this challenge. And I think it's unfair to think it's just a matter of Charlottesville. It's just a matter of the South. It's just a matter of Texas. It's just a matter of Mississippi. No, it's shot through all of the country. Why? Because in a certain sense, it's shot through us. And that's hard to believe. But there's something to it.